We are recording.
Good evening, everybody. It's Thursday, June 2nd, 2022. I am Greg Hooksma, Chair of the Gig Harbor Planning Commission, and I'm calling this evening's meeting to order. We will start with a roll call. Commissioner Brown.
Here.
Commissioner Greina.
Here.
Commissioner Soltis.
Here.
Commissioner Krozik.
Here.
And with the city, we have Carl DeSimas, Senior Planner, and Cindy Andrews, and we really appreciate you filling in this evening, Cindy, for Michelle. And Cindy, if you could just make a note in the minutes of when Commissioner Bradbury joins the meeting, I would appreciate it. Looks like
Yes.
there.
That looks like he's joined us now. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Commissioner Bradbury is now here. So first item on the agenda is approval of our minutes from our last meeting. Are there any corrections or discussion about those minutes? If not, I'm willing to entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Any second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. Motion passes.
Mr. Chairman, I'll abstain because I was not at the last meeting.
Okay, thank you. Duly noted in the minutes. Okay, so the item this evening is the purpose of the meeting is a open public meeting and to allow public comment on the draft ordinance of the short-term rental ordinance that the staff has put together after our work. And so at this point, I will turn it over to Carl DeSimas from the city.
Thank you, Chair. Can everybody hear me okay there?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you. Good evening, commissioners, members of the public in attendance tonight. Thank you for the opportunity to present a draft version of the short-term rental regulations that we've been working on over the past few months. This version that's entitled the Planning Commission version May 26th, 2022 incorporates all of the work and research conducted by both the Planning Commission and staff to date, public comments received to date, and recent edits suggested by the commissioners at our last meeting on May 19th. To that end, I thought it would be good to note that the Planning Commission has conducted 6 study sessions on the topic of short-term rentals dating back to January 27, 2022, a lot of work. I thought it also important to note why the city has chosen to take on this important topic. I'll just share my screen here quickly. Hopefully you can see that okay. Ordinance 1467 explains that the city does not currently have regulations specific to short-term rentals, and in fact does not have a definition for the use. The code currently utilizes the definition of lodging level 1, which is inadequate, and the code does not presently provide a process for permitting such a use unless it is proposed within a zone requiring a conditional use permit. The ordinance also establishes a moratorium on the acceptance of new lodging level 1 permit applications, citing the following reasons. Market demand has produced an increase in the number of short-term vacation rentals offered throughout the city. Number 2, the city has permitted or licensed very few short-term rentals relative to the number of those operating throughout the city. And number 3, the city has not had time to fully evaluate the number of short-term rentals operating within the city limits, the effects these might have on the community, and necessary zoning controls to mitigate those effects. To this end, the City Council directed staff and the Planning Commission to study the issue, take public comment, and bring back recommendations for regulations to the City Council with respect to short-term rentals. As an early action in this process, the Planning Commission took the unusual step of opening an early public comment period to hear from the community. In February, the Planning Commission opened a 2-week public comment period, whereby 36 public comments were submitted into the record. Several public comments were also submitted outside of the public comment period and included in that same record. Staff and Planning Commission reviewed those comments at more than one study session and used them as reference points during the crafting of the current regulations. Planning Commission also utilized their own extensive research, experience, and recommendations from staff's own research of other jurisdictions and state law to inform this current draft. The end result is not perfect, admittedly. It will need some refinement, but staff feels it's a very strong start. And as noted in tonight's staff memo for this hearing, due to some further study and discussions, this version may need some substantive changes in order to be deemed complete. So staff is recommending that the Planning Commission conduct tonight's public hearing as scheduled, but take more time to consider the public's input and further staff recommendations at another study session on June 16th. After which staff will draft another version of the regulations with any changes suggested by the Planning Commission, and which would then be released for another round of public input and a second hearing on July 7th. Staff feels this additional step of holding a second public hearing is necessary and important as we seek to craft a reasonable and prudent regulation that can be recommended to our City Council, knowing that we turned over every stone and will serve the city long into its future. Finally, for tonight's hearing, I want to add that we received 23 written public comments. Those comments have been provided to the Planning Commission prior to tonight's hearing for your consideration. Several of the commenters asked that their comment be read into the record this evening. However, that is not the city's usual policy, and it is unnecessary as the comments are on the public record. Those members of the public who wish to read their comments into the record may do so tonight, but please know that your comment has already been recorded. And Chair, this concludes my presentation for this evening, and I'm available for any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Carl. I appreciate that. So I will now open the public comment portion. And just to note, if you wish to make a comment, you can raise your hand. If you are on your telephone, you will need to push *6 to unmute yourself. When you start your comment, we ask you to state your name, first and last name, and your address, and then you will have 3 minutes to speak. Cindy Andrews from the city staff will keep track of that 3 minutes. She will give a signal when you have 30 seconds left. And at the end of those 3 minutes, your microphone will be turned off. And I think, Carl, you wanted to.
Oh, we're okay.
I think that
Sorry.
you wanted additional comment, Carl, regarding the process of how the public comment will go.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Chair. I did want to note that. And this is our public comment and decorum policy, and it is at the bottom of the agenda. And so it's available for the public to read themselves, but I thought it'd be important to just make note that a couple of things that anyone making out of order comments may be subject to removal from the meeting. And we'll note that through making a motion or a point of order. If someone is making out of order comments, and those out of order comments could be relative to the following and the following policy. All remarks should be addressed to the commission as a body and not to any specific commissioner. All speakers should be courteous in their language and deportment and shall not engage in or discuss or comment on personalities or indulge in derogatory remarks or insinuations with regard to any commission member, the chair, or any member of the staff, or any member of the public. There should be no demonstrations during or at the conclusion of any public comment. These guidelines are intended to promote an orderly system of holding a public meeting to give every person an opportunity to be heard and to ensure that no individuals are embarrassed by voicing their opinions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I will open the floor for public comment. And I see that Carolyn Allen has her hand up. So please state your name, address, and then you will have 3 minutes. Miss
Can you hear me?
Carolyn, you're breaking up.
Hello?
So we can't understand you, Carolyn. There's a bad connection.
Okay, I'm closer to a window. Can you hear me now?
Better, but still imperfect. You can go ahead and try, and I'll let you know if it's garbled or not.
Okay, let's try this one more time. If it doesn't work, I'll hop over to my neighbor's computer.
Okay, well, right now you're good. So state your name and address, then at that point, we'll start the 3-minute clock.
Okay, if at any time it's garbled, please let me know. My name is Carolyn Allen. I reside at 3526 Harborview Drive, Gig Harbor. I am a co-founder of the Gig Harbor Short-Term Rental Alliance. I'm sure you're all aware that our mission is to educate the community and public officials on the benefits of short-term rentals in our city. One of our council members wrote to me, "I can hear your passion. I am passionate about people's lives and their freedom to exercise their property rights, especially when it enables others to be able to afford to remain in their homes past retirement while keeping their homes in pristine condition. Many of these homeowners have chosen to be hosts to a short-term rental. It is their right to use their property to its highest use." Apparently, there have been a few community members, one in particular, 2 former council members, some of the Gig Harbor Planning Commission, and individuals on staff that chose to push their obvious agenda on a city that has had a perfect scorecard in terms of short-term rentals within our city. There was no need for an emergency moratorium because there simply was no emergency. The harsh, restrictive, and in some cases, unlawful regulations that have been proposed deeply concern me and should concern all of you. I ask that you work with individuals in the community that have the seasoned knowledge of the smooth workings of short-term rentals that benefit our city. I ask that you carefully review the concerns of the owners of Gig Harbor short-term rentals, and I ask that you work closely with our city attorney to be sure the laws of our state and country are adhered to. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Allen, and everything came through just fine. Okay. So the next hand I see up is Denise. And I don't see a last name there, but there's only one Denise, so I will presume you know who you are.
Just let him take your time.
Denise, you have your phone muted if you're talking. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Glenn Peterson, and I'm taking my 3 minutes, hopefully, and then 2 of my wife's, Denise. My wife and I own a residence. Pardon me?
Mr. Peterson, that is not allowed. You can't pass on your time to someone else.
That's fine. I'll read half of it, and she can read the second half if that's okay with the commission.
Sure.
Okay. My wife and I own a residence at 8921 Franklin Street, Gig Harbor. I submitted written comments on 527 regarding proposed STR regs. A little of our background: we're newer to Gig Harbor. We came here in 2005. Our kids grew up here. This is our home and where we'll retire. We love Gig Harbor. It's a place we care about. I share this because I know there are many in Gig Harbor with long family histories and stories that make Gig Harbor unique. And maintaining Gig Harbor's unique qualities is common to everyone on this call. But the focus on STRs and proposed solutions by the commission is neither fair, collaborative, or responsive to the issues used to start the process. When I first learned about the proposed regs, it was described as originating due to an emergency. The basis of the emergency wasn't clear to me, but we heard about STRs impacting affordable housing, parking crime, and overall neighborhood complaints. I watched the hearings for context, but it became clearer certain planning commissioners came into this assignment with strong personal opinions and biases towards restricting or eliminating STRs. Though we can't know personal or professional motivations of individual commissioners, we heard this: many opinions and thoughts shared without reference to supporting facts. We heard stories of others that bought multiple STR homes in a given area and changed its character. We also heard about these anecdotal neighborhood complaints. While the commission continue to draw conclusions based on stories from all parts of the country. What we learned was different than what we heard from the commission. For the rest of the story, we learned there was little to no data behind the opinions and conclusions of the commission, no rigor, no analysis, no beef. There was no discussion of STRs having a positive impact. We learned there was little to no impact on housing affordability, crime, or disturbances based upon available data. We learned all of this work was due to about 50 STRs the commission identified at the heart of the emergency. Yet the commission's work went forward to find ways to limit or eliminate STRs. So the question is why? A better question is who benefits? What I do know is the focus of STRs are on individual homeowners, which is absolutely outrageous. I got to thinking, was all this driven by bigger businesses working to keep a market preserved? There is certainly no impact to yachts, bed and breakfast, or other special use permits. And then I learned of the letter sent to council members September 21st, 2021, shortly before the emergency declaration. It was interesting to note the similarities between the letter's recommendations,
30 seconds.
commission's actions, and the timing of the emergency freeze. Some highlights from the citizen clearly familiar with the government process include a strategy on how to regulate STRs using the government apparatus. The letter recommends adoption of STR provisions used by Normandy Park. The letter sets expectations, i.e. this issue is going to be a hornet's nest, and once council has public testimony, it will likely be testy. You might even meet fancy talking out of state people who talk about the great revenue benefit of STRs. The letter bolds the following. Having said this and talking about all viable options,
And
my view
time
is
is up.
just outright
Excuse me,
or
Mr.
ban these
Peterson, your
commercial
time
uses.
is up.
Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to my wife. Go ahead and read from here on.
Okay, having said all of this, the talking about viable options, my view is to please just outright ban these commercial uses of residential zones. If you use the business license approach like Normandy Park, then short-term renters wouldn't even have to change anything they already do, as long as they're at home and don't have the bright idea to hire a property management company to keep things going while they're on vacation. The letter goes on and the city interest speaks for itself. Unfortunately, this is the direction the commission has taken to date. In the end, why do we have a story that's based on less is more, written by a few with personal agendas? Less for Gig Harbor homeowners, fewer property rights, ability to use our property, fewer privacy rights, monitor personal information of guests, fewer assembly rights, no meetings, no support groups or celebrations, fewer options to make ends meet and keep up with property taxes, less happiness. Some of us love interacting and serving others, being a host. Less for business, local businesses here in the city of Gig Harbor. Fewer short-term rentals mean fewer in-town lodging options and fewer customers. Fewer customers mean less revenue for business and ultimately Gig Harbor. But one player in our story gets more, our local government, more administration placed on homeowners, more government growth and bureaucracy, more taxes, costs and fees, and more taking of property rights without compensation. This is a far-reaching proposal that has shepherded into one direction based on opinions and preferences of certain commissioners using a campaign based of fear and conjecture. The commission's work to date hasn't been about fact-finding cost benefits of options and solutions or working with the public to do what was best for Gig Harbor and the citizens. It's been driven by the interests of a few individuals able to amplify their voice by being in the position of influence. This isn't fair or right. We can collaborate to find workable solutions and commonalities. We can address issues in the way that incorporates the diversity of that Gig Harbor offers. I and many others here are willing to work with you to preserve the uniqueness, qualities of Gig Harbor while finding a balance between Gig Harbor citizens and government. I urge the commission to take a fresh look at the proposed STR regulations from a
30 seconds.
from a perspective of what's good for Gig Harbor and our citizens. Please don't play politics by driving legislation at the behest and influence of a few. This is too big of an issue. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you both for your input. We appreciate it. At this point, I don't see any other hands raised. Oh, there we go. Hang on. Kirsten?
Yes, that's me.
Okay. State your name, address, and then go ahead.
My name is Kirsten Moran. I reside at 5512 Timber Lane. I'm a resident of Gig Harbor and graduated from Peninsula High School. Our family has been here since the 80s. The origination of this emergency moratorium is very concerning. And what is most concerning is that it was influenced by one person that adamantly did not want short-term rentals. This was pushed through and encouraged to not open it up for public comment. And what is more concerning is that 7 of the city council voted for this approach. We've had short-term rentals in town for years, and the city has yet to produce a bulk of evidence that says we have a crisis. No crisis, no emergency reason for a moratorium. There can be fair and balanced regulation for the benefit of the community and our local businesses. So far, the current cut and paste approach isn't building any trust. The owner occupied ruling is going to wipe out our short-term rental options for our visiting guests who want to stay with their families. The data that we put together shows that more than half of the 33 available STRs in the city limits are rented 125 days, often 200 to 300 days a year. If the city imposes an owner-occupied only provision for STRs, how is the city going to compensate for the loss of income when they have been going about this great and respectfully supporting the community for years? There is no reasoning behind the difference also of renting a 3-bedroom versus a 2-bedroom. It doesn't even fiscally make sense. I know our local restaurants would value 6 people eating dinner more than 4 people. How is a city plan to monitor that? Are they going to ask how many bedrooms the 4 people stayed in? Our proposed 150-foot rule between STRs doesn't make sense. And watching the meeting, it seemed like it was just copied from another city. Was there any data behind this whatsoever? How is the city going to determine who gets to keep their STR? And how are you going to compensate for the loser in that one? Short-term rentals play a very big part in the overall ecosystem of Gig Harbor commerce. We have books in our homes that are written by real estate agents that showcase the businesses in town. We have coupons for dinners. We have pamphlets for things to do. And we provide an ambiance and experience as an extension of the charm this town provides. I hope the city really does study some data and understand the implications that the city planning committee has put forth. And I also hope that there is a study on the positive aspects of STRs and not just trying to get rid of them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your input. Okay. Carly Grundman.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
We sure can, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Carly Grunman. I live at 2916 96th Street Northwest, Gig Harbor, and I also own other properties, which I won't list it, but we own other properties in Gig Harbor as well. I don't have anything prepared, but I just wanted to echo what everybody else has said, saying that please really look at the implications that this will have. From what I've heard, there's no grounds for an emergency moratorium. And I truly believe this will affect the community of Gig Harbor as well as the small businesses. I own long-term rentals in Gig Harbor. I do not own short-term rentals, but we have plans to build 2 separate short-term rentals within the Gig Harbor area, and we have put it off because of this. This is my livelihood. I work for Alaska Airlines for $50,000 a year, which is not a lot of money, but I'm able to live in Gig Harbor. I've put my husband through school to become a captain for the Alaska State Ferries, put my kids in private school here, all for the basis from our short-term rentals in other states and our long-term rentals in Gig Harbor. So I want you guys to understand that this really will have an implication on how my family brings in money. And, you know, we want to show everybody how great this city is. And people will come here. They're not going to come here to party. I don't think Gig Harbor is a hotspot destination or ruin the whatever it is that it may ruin that you guys are concerned with the character of Gig Harbor. So I really urge you to consider, especially when you're looking at each regulation, like so many people have to live in here for this many days and there can only be this many people per room. Really at each one, please look and be like, how is this going to hurt the integrity of our community? And how is this going to hurt having 2 versus 3 people per room? Please really give this some consideration because it really is our livelihood for my family. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your thoughts. And at this point, I do not see any other hands raised. So I am going to close the public comment period. And just to echo what Carl DeSima said earlier, I'm sure you all appreciate that all of your comments that we have received in the past couple of weeks, in addition to the comments that were provided to City Council back in September, and intervening periods since then and from the prior public comment, have all been read in their entirety by every planning commissioner and have all been considered as we've had our discussions over the, as Carl said, the many hours over 6 meetings. And it looks like we're not done just yet. So I think what I would like to do, Carl, is open it to the commissioners to see if they have anything they'd like to discuss this evening, or if the preference is, as Carl has suggested, to take all of this that we have heard in writing and what we heard this evening and consider it at another study meeting 2 weeks from now. So open the floor to the commissioners. Commissioner Krosick.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, one of the things that I read in several of the comments was talking about how we're going to compensate owners for their loss of income and legal questions relating to prohibiting non-owner occupied short-term rentals. And I'm wondering if we can get an advisory opinion from the city attorney on this issue, whether we are required to allow non-owner occupied short-term rentals, whether we are required to grandfather people that are already operating this business legally. And I say that they are complying with the city's regulations and remitting hotel, motel tax and the like. So I'm wondering, Carl, if that's possible to run that by the city attorney and maybe bring back to us in 2 weeks what his thoughts and feelings on that are.
Absolutely, Commissioner. Oh, I am unmuted. Sorry. Absolutely, we can do that. And we've already had some discussion with the city attorney on several topics relative to the draft, the current version of the draft that we have. And the city attorney has asked several questions and asked us to look into a few clarifications and come back and have another discussion with him prior to, I would say prior to this next study session. So that is the idea here, and I appreciate those questions, and that's what I'd really hope to get out of this meeting. There are questions just like that that we could bring answers back to you on June 16th for the next study session, and sort of slowing the process down just a bit here, I think. Okay, thanks, Carl.
Yeah, and I appreciate that question, Commissioner Krosick, and it does, address a point that I wanted to make as well, is that are there other pieces of information that you all would like from the city staff to bring back as a deliverable for our next meeting? Commissioner Brown.
Well, I'd like to know when we will see the substantive changes that Carl has referred to.
Commissioner Brown, so I would bring those back for the study session on June 16th, along with whatever answers I can get for you on any questions that you all have tonight after reading through the public comments that we've received, or any other burning questions that, you know, maybe were outstanding that we haven't answered yet, you know,
Well-
or well enough in your mind.
I would prefer to see these substantive changes prior to the meeting on the 16th, so I have a chance to read them and understand them and form opinions and questions about them. And so what's the problem with producing that sooner, Carl?
Well, I think the problem is that it's not fully baked. You know, I've had a couple of discussions with the city attorney who's asked me some questions. And so we have to do a little bit of work on our end in order to get some, you know, some responses back to him. And I guess I shouldn't say, and maybe it was a bit of a misnomer in the memo to say that these were substantive changes being made. I mean, these are really recommendations, right? These are really more like, you know, it's legal counsel to say this could be a problem or this could be a problem. One of those changes, and one of the major changes, and the reason that I use substantive, is that the question came up about the renewal process for the permit. And, you know, while we're using the business license, or that our idea was to use the business license as a vehicle, in talking with the city attorney, he doesn't feel like that is defensible or that is a proper process. And so the recommendation from the city attorney is to use the actual permit itself, something like a special use permit, or something like what we do for food trucks currently, where there's an annual renewal process for that permit itself, rather than hanging it on the annual renewal of a business license. So that's the type of substantive change. That change in and of itself has some ramifications throughout those regulations, and will require us to look at a couple other places where we might need to make some changes. So that's really the big one. The other one that I could share with you that's easy to share is the non-conforming uses section, which I think we all had some concerns about anyway. And the city attorney had a lot of concerns about that section. And so his recommendation is to just remove it altogether.
And I think Commissioner Brown, that the staff has historically done a good job of getting that information out to us for the next meeting a week ahead of time, so that to give you as much time as possible to be able to, you know, contemplate and research and make recommendations. So I don't think that you're going to be receiving that the day of our next meeting.
That's correct, Chair. I would have this, we'll have this out by next Thursday, June 9th. And I'll try to have it out before 5 o'clock at the end of the day, which is my modus operandi, I think, but I'll try and do better this time so I can get it to you a little bit sooner. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Brown? I know it's not completely satisfying, but.
Yes.
Other questions or comments? Go ahead, Commissioner Soltis.
Well, I have a list here. Carl, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Just a preamble, if I may, Chairman. There was a lot of details in the set of comments to kind of plow through, and there are a lot of really good, really insightful things were said, and it's I've been kind of track them in my mind against the draft that we put together, and there are some things that I think we can talk about, and I'm a little bit concerned about, and I'm a party to this, but and upon reflection, perhaps we've overreached a little bit in terms of the data that we're suggesting be turned over to the city by the STR owners. terms of names, addresses, driver's license numbers, there was several comments that kind of implied that that was approaching illegal data gathering, or at least improper data gathering. And I'm not totally convinced that we need that data to, manage the STR process. So I guess I'd like to kind of suggest that we all think about that a little bit more over the interim and be prepared to dig deeper into it when we get back together. Because I thought some of those comments about the guest log and that information were pretty well based. I wanted to make sure Carl could double check for us about the fine structure that we put in place, vis-a-vis what we would fine other businesses that were not doing what they should be doing. We put some pretty big numbers out there, and I don't know what the other fines might be for a parallel activity that's performing badly. So Carl, maybe you could bring back what the standard fines might be versus compared to what we actually are proposing for the STRs.
Will do, Commissioner.
I thought one really good comment, I learned a lot about Graham and all the things that she might be doing for her birthday party. And it kind of points out that writing a events definition is a challenge. And I think, Carl, you and the city attorney may want to take on that challenge to make it a little more clear, because you can easily put together some, situations that were not really what we intended to restrict, but would end up being restricted by strict reading of the words. So that may need some massaging. I think the intent is that we don't want to have events get out of control and cause a problem in the neighborhood. And maybe there's a better way of doing that that would put us on a better ground. And we also need to think about enforcement. One of the letters talked about it being critical, but the city up to this point, has not been staffed to deal with any enforcement issues, and not just of a STR that was not complying, but of STRs that were operating and not even being registered in the city that properly. That may cause us to look very seriously at the staff level we have for enforcement. Because if we are not willing to enforce a rule or regulation we put in place, then we sort of haven't really made a good use of our time. So I thought those comments had a lot of validity, and we ought to talk about that later a little bit more. And if I may, the last thing I had on my list was the comment about two comments. One is about the platform, so that we put in our ordinance that they needed to be Airbnb or VRBO or something improved by the community development director. I guess the big ones. That's going to deserve a little more of a discussion, because there was pretty good comments in there about maybe that's restricting the rights of the property owner. But the other hand, they give you a lot of good filtering capabilities, and I think that having those major operators involved makes the whole process better for the city, because they will screen out bad actors routinely. Not bad actors, but people that might be a problem. So setting those things as necessary versus just kind of a nice idea, I think merits a little more discussion on our part, because there's pluses and minuses to that approach. And I'll stop there, Chairman. I just wanted to put a couple of those issues on the table, and there are a couple other larger ones that I won't even talk about, but we need to talk about them next time around, because they're pretty important.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, could I just respond to a couple of those things?
Sure, of course.
That'd be okay. I just wanted to note that the questions about the logbook and whether or not that's overreaching. The city attorney had some concerns about that as well. And I will definitely need to address that. They felt that some of what we were asking for there, we don't really have a good reason for needing it. And I think I tend to agree. The important piece may be from a logbook perspective, and Jeremy and I did find some jurisdictions that do require a logbook of some kind, but in speaking with the city attorney, we found, we talked about what's important for that logbook. Well, what's probably important is dates that the whole house was rented versus when just rooms were rented. I mean, that's kind of what we'd be looking for based on the structure of the current regulations. And, the rest of it really maybe is kind of taking it too far as home address and license plate numbers. So I think that seems to be well taken. The events definition and how we define events, that was something that was also brought up in our discussion. So I think that is something that we certainly should look at. And the platforms and the approved list of platforms, I believe there was a question on that one. Sorry. Yeah, there were, he did have some questions on that one. I'll have to revisit it with him though, because I don't know if we came to any kind of conclusion on it necessarily. And could you, Commissioner Soltis, could you tell me again your concern about enforcement?
Well, it's just a general, are we staffed to really enforce the policies that we may adopt? We've got to be sure that that there's a way to verify that everything is set up properly initially, with the visits initially. And then over time, there may be incidences that need to be looked at for whatever reason. And also there's a larger issue of, to me at least, there are a number of STRs operating in the city that are not approved for operation through the processes that the city set up. And what would we do if we do update this ordinance and institute this ordinance, and then there are people that are still operating outside outside of the ordinance? So it needs to be staffed properly if we're going to actually set the ordinance in place.
Thank you.
And that, Carl, was more of a note to the other commissioners that maybe we need to be sure that this is properly addressed in a later meeting.
Commissioner Greiner?
I just wanted to say that, like Commissioner Solstice, I made a whole list of things based on reading all the comments. And as he was going through his list, I was checking off the ones that I had as well. And I appreciate the public input on the things that we can go back and review again. And again, my list was very similar to his. I have some other ones that I think probably lend themselves more to a study session than this meeting. But I just wanted to echo what he had brought up already.
Okay, thank you.
I would just simply add that based on all the public comments that were received and when I reviewed them, there are quite a number of very solid comments that are going to drive some very substantial changes to our recommendations for the regulation. And discussion of those would be more appropriate for that venue on the 16th.
you have some specific examples you want, Carl to list or research or bring some information back?
No, I think we have all the research that's there, but we need to consider the public input. Some examples include, big ones, include owner occupied, the 150-foot rule for separation of STRs. And a couple of them have already been brought up by other commissioners, the kinds of data that we would want to collect, the numbers of people that could occupy a specific room, and those kinds of concerns raised by the public.
Okay. Hey, Carl, could you, is there a way that you all can go back over the last several years? I don't know how far back you can reach back, but in one of the comments, they said the Airbnbs have been in Gig Harbor since around 2016. And find out how much tax revenue the city has collected, either in a lodging tax or, like direct taxes, like B&Bs have to pay. And so that, again, because I think that's an important piece of data, because part of our discussion, as I recall, regarding using the platforms is that information is then provided, and it ensures that the hotels, the bed and breakfasts, the inns, and the STRs would all be on equal footing, with regard to paying the lodging tax and the other taxes.
Yeah, I do want to, I know we've seen some numbers, and I don't know, I think those were just, from maybe last year, and we pulled those numbers, but I don't know, and I haven't had a chance to ask anyone if those numbers were aggregated in any way. In other words, is this just sort of a lump sum of the taxes we've received, lodging taxes, and I kind of assume that they are. Or were they sort of broken down? Is there any way for us to break them down by short-term rental, bed and breakfast, and hotel, motel type thing? And I don't know that, but I've already actually made a note for myself to earlier today to look into that. So if that's data that we can get and have it aggregated down to that that granular level, then we will certainly do it. Otherwise, we can certainly bring back the lump sum, for the past number of years, and we can look at it that way, and maybe make surmise a bit. I don't know. So we'll see what we can bring back, though. Definitely.
Yeah, and then I thought a lot about that events definition as well. Because certainly some of those scenarios, whether I was trying to determine if they were based in real guests or just made up scenarios, but certainly all of them are plausible. Would it be easier just to say that there are no events that, just use very generic language, no events that would create a disturbance, and as kind of a generic term?
Well, yeah, I do think we need to think about that, but I do want to, if we're going to do it, then I think it has to be very specific, because if we just say disturbance, then we kind of get into that discussion that we have often here about noise. And Cindy can speak to that, if we ask her to. She has plenty of experience taking calls on noise disturbances and how, what rises to the level of a noise disturbance. Very, very difficult. And in my past life as a code enforcement officer, I dealt with it several times. I mean, people living next to golf courses and, lawnmowers running in the early in the morning and things like that. And, what rises to that level, and they've got something with a car with a bad muffler, and so that gets a little bit too, it allows opinion to creep in, I suppose. And then we're left in that gray area of trying to sort of define it on the fly or using a sort of a common sense definition. So I would say we want to get pretty specific, and that's something that staff can certainly research through other jurisdictions and see what we can glean and come back with some good examples of, you know, a good solid definition.
Okay. All right.
Carl, here's a question. Are there any regulations on the books that would require a homeowner to get a permit for a significant special event, such as a wedding, where they might have, say, 50 guests come to their house and you have 20 cars parked up and down the street?
Well, we have a, Cindy, help me out with this one. We have a special use permit. Cindy processes a lot of these. So can you speak to that, Cindy?
Correct. We do have a special use permit process, but typically that is for commercial situations in right-of-ways, in parking lots, in common areas. When it comes to private property, single-family residents, no, we don't really have a permit process because, you know, people host events all the time, you know, birthday parties, and they host graduation parties and some of those events. So we've not pursued that special use process to include private properties. Residential.
In that regard, I would make a point of clarification that an STR, then, if we're allowing rental of the entire property, would be a business, not a private residence.
Yeah.
So in that kind of a case, would there be a permitting process that would allow, for example, a wedding to take place on that property?
Well, I think we have to remember that by definition, and this is where short-term rentals get weird. You know, this is where the city attorney and I kind of went round and round on this, in that, you know, it's defined as a single family residence, yet there, and the use of a short-term rental as a use is really no different in a lot of ways. They're not using the house any differently than somebody living there would, right? It's still a single family residence. And I think we had some discussions about that too, relative to parking and other things, right? So, you know, what are the differences? The only difference is that, like you said, they are now sort of running a business there, something akin to a home occupation, which we have a lot of home occupations throughout the city. A short-term rental operates in much the same way, and, you know, home occupation in almost every case throughout at almost every jurisdiction that I've ever been associated with or known about, home occupations are not allowed to have any sort of outward appearance of a business operating there. You know, no signs. Parking has to be typically, largely contained on site, but that's kind of a hard one to really regulate. And, you know, and in some cases, stipulations on how many folks can be visiting the business at any one time, those sorts of things, but no outward appearance of any kind of a business. Short-term rentals are kind of operate in that same manner. And so, to Cindy's point about how we permit special uses, you know, we only issue those permits on commercial property, not on residential property. And so it would be improper, I guess, for us to have any kind of say or require a single family residential dwelling owner to have to get a special permit for some kind of event. Now,
I appreciate that answer, both of you. I was trying to drive to the problem of major events, traffic, noise, so on and so forth, to see if there was any viable way to address that. And a special permitting process does not appear to be one of them.
well, the special permitting process in this case, I guess, is the short-term rental permit, right? And that, you know, so in and of itself, I guess our hope is that we can address it in some manner. And And I think it kind of needs to be addressed because I think it does get at the heart of some of the concerns that folks have out in the community. Now, you know, granted, the people that we hear from mostly are those people who have concerns on the other side of the issue. But we have heard concerns from people in the community about noise within their neighborhoods and events taking place at a short-term rental, you know, and concerns about that becoming more prevalent. So, you know, I think the Planning Commission has done a great job of trying to balance those known factors on both sides, and trying to figure out a way to make it work. So, so I appreciate your comment, Commissioner Bradbury. I think it's something we definitely have to keep in the back of our mind.
Commissioner Krosik?
Yes, I think there might be another way to approach the issue of events if we want to permit them. And that would be to limit the size of the event. In other words, to say you can have an event at your short-term rental, but it can't exceed 10, 20, 25 people. So in other words, you'd have kind of a limitation. I realize that might be a little bit more difficult to enforce, but if we had it in the ordinance, it would at least set some guidelines for the property owners to know what the city wants to permit or not permit. Also, I wanted to follow up on another comment that you made, Greg, and regarding the hotel motel tax. Is Carl, can you look up and see how many people who are in the short-term rental business have been remitting hotel motel taxes? So I know we've heard some figures bounced around here in the 30s, that there's 32, 38, 35 short-term rentals currently active within the city of Gig Harbor. And I'd like to know how many individuals or individuals representing their short-term rental business are actually remitting hotel motel taxes.
Yeah, Commissioner Krosik, we can definitely again try and look into that and see if we can aggregate that data and get it down to that level and know if we can discern the number of short-term rentals that are actually paying those lodging taxes. And I don't know the data well enough to say, so I'll certainly do the research on that and bring back whatever I can. So I think it's a really good question and a really good point. And then I would also say that I think what we found in talking with the companies that we talked to, consulted with, we found that I think it was on average somewhere in the 45 is what we average. So 45 short-term rentals and within the city. And I believe that did not include the liveaboards.
Okay, thanks, Carl.
Yeah, well, there are lots of comments also, Carl, and I'll get you in a second there, Commissioner Soltis. I see your hand up. From a number of people and from the Short-Term Rental Alliance, that they wish to work with us and they submitted their input at the beginning and we have considered that all along and referenced back to it. So I wonder if it would be reasonable, the question John just asked is ask that directly to for the Alliance to provide that information to us. Please canvass your members and this is a piece of information that we'd like to have.
Excellent idea.
It's a great idea, Chair. Thank you. I will look into that.
And go ahead, Commissioner Soltis.
I was going to ask Carl, one of the comments we got was that it implied that the changed permit process to go to the level 2 kind of permit versus the conditional use approach, that it was still somewhat burdensome compared to, well, I'm not sure compared to what. And I was just going to ask you, in your opinion, have we made the process more straightforward and streamlined by going to a level 2 permit vis-a-vis a conditional use permit?
Yes, absolutely, Commissioner Soltis, because the conditional use permit requires a hearing. So it needs to go to the hearing examiner for a decision, whereas the level of a type 2 permit is an administrative permit. So that's approved at mine and Katrina's level.
Yeah.
Still requiring public input, still requiring a notice, both require a notice. So a lot of the process is the same in that regard. But the end result is, I don't know, I don't want to say arduous, more arduous, but there's that extra added component of going to the hearing examiner who would make the final decision.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Chair, if I could, I'd also like to note, I saw a couple hands raised when you asked that question, or had noted that we could reach out to the short-term rental alliance. And so for the members of the public who are listening, if it's okay, I'd just like to say, please feel free to email me directly if you have data that you would like to provide us relative to what the commissioners are discussing here tonight, and we can certainly consider it that way, and it would be appreciated. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Carl. Commissioner Brown?
Yeah, I was interested in a number of the comments that had to do about the fairness of changing the rules. And I think on the 16th, we ought to consider again the idea of grandfathering in some of the short-term rental operations that were legal, permitted, and et cetera. And to that end, Carl, if we could have just a count of the number of permitted STRs that existed as of September 2021, we'll know what size, the number of exceptions that we might be considering.
It's a great point, Commissioner Brown. And again, so grandfathering is not, I mean, it's not language that we can use because grandfathering has the connotation that it's just permitted in perpetuity. And that's never the case really when it comes to land use. But non-conforming is something that, you know, that is something that we can use. And that's why I was in our effort here, I tried to craft in that non-conforming provision just based on other codes and ordinances that we have already in the municipal code. And it's fairly common, you know, to have a provision like that. But it's a bit problematic in this case. And here's why. Partly, well, mostly because the ones that are already permitted legally have a conditional use permit. And a conditional use permit does not work the same way that other permits work relative to non-conforming rights. So if a current short-term rental has a conditional use permit already, they are permitted under that conditional use permit. So this ordinance, in other words, would not affect them until which time as they what's the word I'm looking for? Till which time as they extinguish that use. In other words, stop operating their short-term rental for longer than 1 year, I think is how the code is, what the code reads. And then that use would go away. Their conditional use permit then would die, and they would have to reapply at that point in order to, and then at that point they would have to come in under this new short-term rental permit process that we're trying to create. For other short-term rentals that are operating within the city, most if not all of them were approved through just a business license, which is not really a land use approval at all. It's just a business license that any business has to get anyway. And many businesses are required to get a land use permit in addition to that business license. And in fact, back to home occupations, our code does talk about and require a home occupation permit, of which we've never actually issued or required anybody to come in for a home occupation permit. It was some sort of an oversight in our code that just recently came to my attention. And in fact, it's in our fee schedule, a home occupation permit. And I don't even know if we have an application for one. So something else for another day. But back to your point about, so those short-term rentals that are operating under a business license are they technically have no approval. So there would really be nothing for them to come in under. There's no non-conforming rights. They have no non-conforming rights in that sense. So in speaking with the city attorney about this, he suggested, that the non-conforming use is not the right avenue for those currently operating, but the city could, of course, be lenient when rolling out this new ordinance and, give people the opportunity, once we know about their operation, to come in under that permit and not go straight to fines, kind of take a softer, gentler approach at the beginning in order to get conformance. And then to your second point about the count of legally permitted, we can certainly bring that back. Yeah, we have those numbers, and it's not many.
Right. But those, my point is simple. The people who jump through the hoops, obtain legal permits, if they are affected by this new ordinance, I think there's a question of fairness there.
Yes.
I mean, they were straight with the city within the last couple of years. We're changing the rules. It may have significant financial impacts on them. And I think we ought to consider grandfathering them in so that they can basically ride on the permits that they received a year or 2 years ago. And I recommend that everyone take a look at Michelle Hussein's letter that came in, and that describes the situation perfectly, I think. And if we just created a hypothetical, what happens to these people who were legally permitted if this ordinance is enacted?
I believe that the Husseins are one of the, and I have to look it up, but I believe they are one of the property owners who actually went through the conditional use permit process.
Yes, they are. So they say, yes.
Yeah, that's right. I'm remembering now. I'm looking, I just pulled up their comment to refresh my memory here, but yeah, they are. And so again, like I just said, this ordinance would not really have an effect on their operation because they're working under a conditional use permit already.
And Carl, if I could interject, and thanks for bringing that point up again, Tom, but as I recall at our last meeting, we had that discussion at the very end, and that all the commissioners agreed that that would be the case for any of the folks that had already gone through the CUP process and paid the money, and for the very reasons you're talking about in fairness, that they would be allowed to continue even if they were within 150 feet of another one that was had also gone through the CUP process, for example.
Well, yeah. Could we attach those comments to the public record somehow so that we don't get people upset about things that aren't really threats?
Well, certainly what we can do is address it directly. And so for the next public hearing, knowing that we were going to have 2 public hearings, I did not prepare a detailed staff report for this public hearing. The next public hearing in July, we will have a detailed staff report. And in that staff report, I will certainly address that very issue.
Yeah, and Commissioner Brown, you bring up another point that I think I've been given a lot of thought to, and especially after reading all the comments, all along the way, is that there seems to be more than one misconception about what has happened in this process. And Carl, iterated some of the process as it came. But for example, there were many animated comments about the moratorium. And I think it's important for the public to understand that the Planning Commission had absolutely nothing to do with initiating the moratorium. We weren't consulted. As far as I know, none of us knew it was coming until we were tasked by the council to study this problem. And in fact, we have worked diligently to try to move this process along as quickly as possible, including having two extraordinary meetings, I think is the term, outside of our regular first and third Thursdays of the month. And we put in long hours in trying to move this process along. So I think that there may be some disagreement about our conclusions, but I think it's important for the public to understand, how this played out. The other thing is, as I understood, what we were tasked to do is that we were not tasked to fix, and I'll use one of the terms from the public comments, a tempest in a teapot. My understanding is we were tasked by the city council to study an issue to prevent future problems that have played out across the country and around the United States, and in fact around the world, in places where the proliferation of STRs created problems for towns of various sizes. And you look at the data here, we went from, again, using the public input, we went from STRs assuming 0 in 2016, and now we have 33 6 years later. I think the idea is not to have 66 in Millville 6 years from now. So that's kind of been my working philosophy is how do we prevent future problems and address the needs of both the homeowners as well as the members of the community. It's interesting if you go and look at one of the websites, and I appreciated that it was provided by in one of the public comments, the airdna.co, and it will show you exactly where the STRs are in Gig Harbor. And it won't surprise you to see where most of them are located. So, and I invite you all to take a look at that. So, and then finally, my last comment would be, I was reading talk about Normandy Park in several of the public comments, and I really was curious about what that was about, because there seemed to be a lot of emotion behind the comments about Normandy Park. And it wasn't until I read about the second to the last public comment that I realized where that came from. And again, I just want the public to know that letter that was sent to the council, as far as I know, was seen by no member of the Planning Commission until that package was delivered to us. So that issue raised by Mark Hoppen in that letter to the mayor, the prior mayor, and the prior city council is not a piece of information we had until the package was delivered to us. And so it was nothing that I don't believe any of us discussed. And in the many examples that people brought forward, I don't recall that Normandy Park was ever given as an example of the things that we discussed. So I just wanted to, have the public understand what the process has been and what I believe our task was.
That's my recollection as well, Greg. I never saw that Normandy Park letter until recently.
Okay, any other comments by the commissioners? All right, well, I appreciate, all your great work, and taken a step back after we've heard the input, and I think, the information that we've asked you, Carl, to provide to us, the last thing I would ask is to discuss with the city attorney and perhaps consider having him attend the next meeting. That could be helpful.
Okay, Chair, I will certainly, I'll run that up the flagpole.
Okay.
I certainly agree with that, Greg.
Yeah, it's a rarity that we do something like that, but certainly in some cases, I think it makes sense, and this might be one of those cases where there's, definitely a lot of focus on the issue, but not only that, there's certainly some legal ramifications potentially around what we decide, and we don't want to put the council in a bad position when making their decision.
Okay. All right. Opportunity for last thoughts. Otherwise, we'll move on to other business. Carl, next meeting?
Next meeting, June 16th. We'll be talking about short-term rentals. I think that'll encompass the entire meeting. We have an extra Thursday in this month. So we wouldn't be meeting again, which I think is good because that'll give staff plenty of time to draft the next version of these regulations prior to holding that public hearing on July 7th. So short-term rentals for the next couple of meetings, and then we'll be moving into something else, and I don't know what that something else is quite yet.
Okay. Right, thanks. Commissioner Soltis, you had a comment?
Yeah, just something new and different for a change. Yeah, I think we need a break from short-term rentals. Just to let the commission know that the city has kicked off a climate change advisory board to look at advancing a comprehensive plan update for climate change earlier than normal update for the comprehensive plans. And I got myself stuck on that board kind of voluntarily, so I'm not really stuck. But we had one meeting, and we're going to have another one on June 8th to work through the various elements of that the city can address in terms of climate. And it's pretty interesting and exciting, and I'm really glad that the city, the council has endorsed this approach, and I look forward to giving you guys briefing updates whenever you guys want one or whenever you need one. So anyway, I'm looking forward to doing that, and I hope that I would welcome any comments that you have in terms of issues and concerns. And once I know more about the details, I'll share those, and we can have more of a dialogue. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for that back brief.
And the next meeting will be June 8th, as far as that committee goes. And it's a big committee. Just for the commissioners' understanding, we have representatives from Planning Commission, Parks Commission, we have council members on the committee, and then we have folks from Puget Sound Energy. We have folks from the port, Tacoma, Port of Tacoma. I'm trying to remember who else is on that committee. Sorry, Commissioner Soltis?
Penn Light's on it.
Penn
Pierce
Light.
County has a lot of people, has some representation as well.
Pierce County. It's a really good, diverse group. The Master Builders Association. We have a representative from the Master Builders as well. So it's a really good group, really interesting. I think the conversations are going to be fascinating, and those meetings are also public. So the public can listen in on those meetings, and they're found. You can any members of the public who are listening that are interested, and planning commissioners who are interested. We have a website set up on the city's website where you can find all the information about that.
Okay, terrific. Thanks. Well, looking at the agenda, I am willing to entertain a motion to adjourn our meeting.
So moved.
Second,
All right, we have a motion that has been seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
I,
All those opposed, nay. There are no nays. The motion passes unanimously. It is 7:20 PM and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
get to work, Carl.
Thanks again to all the public for your input.